After refusing to babysit my stepsister's kids, my father threatened to cut me off, leading to a cascade of family secrets that would change everything. I'm Evelyn Mitchell, a 32-year-old architect, and what started as a simple boundary issue has spiraled into something I never could have imagined. My story begins in my self-designed modern home in the suburbs of Boston, where clean lines and open spaces reflect my need for order and control, a need that would soon be thoroughly tested. My parents divorced when I was 10, and that experience shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. After my mother moved out, it was just my father and me in our colonial-style house. We developed what I thought was an unshakable bond. I was his little architect, always drawing houses and buildings, while he encouraged my dreams with books about famous designers. I believed we shared everything. But as I would later learn, my father, Gerald Mitchell, was a master at keeping secrets. When I was 16, my father introduced me to Victoria, an elegant gallery owner in her early 50s. They had been dating for months without telling me. The betrayal stung, but I tried to be supportive, pushing down my hurt feelings as I'd learned to do. A few months later, they married, and Victoria moved in with her daughter, Hazel. My quiet, orderly life transformed overnight. From being an only child focused on my architectural sketches, I suddenly had a stepsister who seemed to represent everything I wasn't: outgoing, spontaneous, and always seeking attention. Hazel and I maintained a polite distance, two strangers forced to share a family name but little else. At 18, I escaped to college, throwing myself into my architectural studies with a passion that left little room for family drama. After graduating, I established my own firm in Boston, channeling my need for control into designing spaces that brought order to chaos. I'd visit my father and Victoria during holidays, making the obligatory appearances at family gatherings while keeping emotional distance. Hazel and I maintained our superficial relationship through occasional birthday texts and awkward small talk at family dinners. Present day. The careful boundaries I'd constructed began to crumble when Hazel, her husband Mason, and their two children, 5-year-old Oliver and 3-year-old Ruby, moved to Boston. Mason had accepted a position with a prestigious real estate development firm, and Hazel had left her teaching career to focus on their family. When they first arrived, my father called, his voice carrying that familiar mix of authority and expectation. "Evelyn, they'll need help settling in. You know the city better than anyone." I agreed reluctantly, more out of professional courtesy than familial obligation. I showed them around, recommended neighborhoods, and even used my connections to help them find a suitable house. I thought that would be the end of my involvement, but I was wrong. So very wrong. 1 week later, it started with unannounced visits. Hazel began appearing at my door every evening with Oliver and Ruby in tow. She'd catch me just as I was finishing my design work, my drafting table covered in blueprints for a new museum project. The first time, I was surprised to see her standing there, designer diaper bag over one shoulder, Ruby balanced on her hip. "I just need to run a few errands," she'd say, already ushering the children inside before I could respond. "It'll only be an hour, I promise." I initially agreed, watching as Oliver wandered over to my architectural models, his small fingers hovering dangerously close to a miniature of my latest design. But what started as occasional favor quickly became a daily routine. Every evening, just as I was transitioning from work mode to my precious personal time, my doorbell would ring. The children weren't difficult. Oliver was surprisingly interested in my architectural models, and Ruby was content to color quietly. But I valued my evening solitude, those peaceful hours I used to sketch personal projects, meet friends, or simply decompress. As a designer, I needed that time to recharge my creative energy. I tried setting boundaries with Hazel multiple times. "You should look into hiring a regular babysitter," I suggested one evening, watching as she gathered her things. I know some excellent agencies that work with professional families. Oh, I'm still getting settled, she'd reply with a dismissive wave. Besides, it's so good for the kids to spend time with their aunt. Family should help family, right? That phrase, family should help family, began to grate on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. Each time she said it, I felt my carefully designed life being disrupted, my boundaries being erased line by line. Friday evening. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I had an important gallery opening to attend, a networking event crucial for securing future design projects. I'd explicitly told Hazel I wouldn't be available, even sending her a text to remind her that morning. I understand completely, she had replied. Don't worry about us tonight. I was just putting on my blazer, my portfolio ready by the door, when the doorbell rang. There stood Hazel, Oliver, and Ruby already stepping past me into the house. Before I could protest, she was backing away, car keys jingling in her hand. Emergency meeting with Mason's client, she called over her shoulder. Won't be long. Hazel, wait. I called after her, but she was already in her car, pulling away from my carefully landscaped driveway. My calls went straight to voicemail. Even Mason wasn't answering his phone. I stood in my foyer, dressed for the gallery opening, watching as Oliver began examining my latest architectural model, a sustainable community center I'd been hoping to present that very evening. Ruby had already settled on my cream-colored sofa, opening her coloring books. The reality of the situation hit me like a collapsing wall. I was trapped, my plans demolished by Hazel's presumption. I had to miss the gallery opening, a crucial networking event that could have led to future projects. Instead, I spent the evening watching Oliver and Ruby until 9 p.m., when Hazel finally returned. Evening confrontation. When Hazel finally returned, her designer dress and perfectly styled hair told a different story than her claimed emergency meeting. I felt my professional composure cracking. What happened tonight was completely unacceptable, I said, standing in my modernist entryway, arms crossed. The children were gathering their things behind me, Oliver carefully putting away the sketching materials I'd given him to keep him occupied. It was just an emergency, Evelyn. Hazel's voice carried that familiar, dismissive tone. These things happen. What kind of emergency requires full makeup and a cocktail dress? I gestured at her outfit. You deliberately ignored my plans and dumped your children on me. I had an important dinner with Mason's clients. I thought you'd understand. You're always talking about networking. She was avoiding my eyes, busying herself with Ruby's coat buttons. That's when my carefully maintained professional demeanor finally shattered. We're not doing this anymore, Hazel. I'm not your on-call babysitter. We might share a family name, but that doesn't mean you can take advantage of me like this. Hazel's head snapped up, her eyes widening. Take advantage? I thought we were finally becoming close, like real sisters. Isn't that what you've always wanted? A real family? Real family? I laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls I designed for perfect acoustics. Real family respects boundaries. Real family doesn't manipulate and lie. We've barely spoken in years before you moved here, and now suddenly you're acting like we're best friends? The kids love coming here, she protested, her voice cracking. Oliver adores your architectural models. And Ruby. Stop. I held up my hand. I care about the children, but this isn't healthy for any of us. No more unannounced visits. No more babysitting, unless explicitly arranged in advance. This is my home, my workplace, and my life. I need you to respect that. Tears welled in Hazel's eyes as she gathered her children. Oliver looked back at my latest model, his small face confused by the tension in the room. As they left, Hazel's shoulders were shaking, but I stood firm in my modernist doorway, feeling both relieved and guilty. I thought that would be the end of it. I should have known better. In families like ours, nothing ends quietly. The next morning, my father's call came as I was reviewing blueprints for my museum project. Gerald Mitchell's name, flashing on my phone screen, still had the power to make me feel like that 16-year-old girl again, uncertain and seeking approval. "What's this about you refusing to help Hazel?" His voice carried that familiar authoritative tone, the one he'd used throughout my childhood when discussing my architectural drawings. "She called me in tears last night." I straightened in my ergonomic office chair, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows I'd designed specifically for optimal natural light. "Dad, she's been taking advantage of my time and goodwill. Last night, she ruined an important business meeting by showing up unannounced with the kids." "Business meetings can be rescheduled, Evelyn. Family is more important." He paused, and I could picture him in his office, surrounded by the traditional decor that I'd always found suffocating. "I thought I raised you better than this." "You raised me to be independent and successful," I counted, my fingers tracing the clean lines of my latest design. "You encouraged my dreams of becoming an architect. Now you're asking me to put all that aside to be Hazel's personal babysitter? I'm asking you to be a sister, to be part of this family." His voice hardened. "Hazel needs support right now. She's a young mother in a new city. She needs to hire a professional babysitter. I have my own life, my own career." "A career I helped you build," he interrupted. "Who paid for your architecture school? Who introduced you to your first clients?" The implied threat hung in the air like dust after a demolition. I felt my careful composure cracking. "Are you threatening to cut me off professionally because I won't babysit?" "I'm reminding you of your obligations to this family. Victoria and Hazel are your family now, whether you like it or not. Your attitude since the marriage has been disappointing, to say the least." "My attitude?" I stood up, pacing across my polished concrete floors. "I've been nothing but civil. I helped them move here, showed them around, opened my home. But I have boundaries, Dad. Just like in architecture, without proper structure, everything collapses." "Don't lecture me with your architectural metaphors," he snapped. "Either you apologize to Hazel and continue helping with the children, or you'll find your professional connections might become less reliable." The threat was clear now, as stark as black lines on white paper. "I'm a successful architect in my own right. I don't need your connections anymore." "Are you sure about that?" His voice was cold. "Think carefully about your next move, Evelyn. Very carefully." The call ended with a click, leaving me standing in my carefully designed space, feeling like the walls were closing in. Family aftermath. In the days that followed, my sleek modern home became a fortress of solitude. Victoria began sending long text messages about family duty and forgiveness. My aunts, who had always praised my independent spirit, now called regularly to express their disappointment. Even my social media feeds were filled with Hazel's pointed posts about true family bonds and the importance of sisterly love. I buried myself in my work, focusing on the museum project that could define my career. But even in my minimalist home office, surrounded by models and blueprints, I couldn't escape the growing pressure. The carefully constructed walls of my life were developing cracks. Every ping from my phone carried potential guilt. Every email could be another family member expressing their disappointment. Hazel had taken to sharing daily photos of Oliver and Ruby, always with captions about how much they missed their Aunt Evelyn. The children's innocent faces made my heart ache, even as my mind remained firm on my boundaries. I tried talking to my friends over dinner at my favorite bistro, but their responses were mixed. Some, like my college roommate Sarah, supported my stance. "You've worked too hard to become someone's default babysitter," she said over wine. "Your time and career matter too." Others weren't so understanding. Family is family, my friend Michael argued. Maybe you could compromise? But how do you compromise when your boundaries have already been repeatedly violated? How do you maintain professional integrity when your own father threatens to undermine it? These questions haunted me as I worked late into the night, the soft glow of my drafting lamp casting shadows across half-finished designs. Self-reflection. Alone in my house, surrounded by the clean lines and open spaces I designed, I found myself questioning everything. Had I been too harsh with Hazel? Should I have tried harder to build a relationship with her when we were younger? The modern architecture I'd created, once a source of pride, now felt like a physical manifestation of the walls I'd built around myself. I remembered my childhood drawings of dream houses, always with perfect families inside them. My father had encouraged those dreams, praising my attention to detail and structure. Now those same qualities were being used against me, labeled as cold and unfeeling, rather than professional and organized. But another part of me, the part that had survived my parents' divorce and built a successful career, remained resolute. I'd learned early that sometimes the strongest structures are the ones that can stand alone. Unexpected revelation. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was at the Architects Cafe, my regular spot near the museum site, reviewing construction documents when I heard a familiar voice. Looking up, I saw Mason, Hazel's husband, at a corner table. He wasn't alone. A woman I didn't recognize sat across from him, their heads close together in intimate conversation. My first thought was this must be a client meeting. Mason's real estate development work often involved close consultations. But then I saw him reach across the table and take her hand, their fingers intertwining in a way that spoke of something far more personal than business. I sat frozen at my table, my coffee growing cold beside my blueprints. The scene before me felt like a draft gone wrong, lines connecting in ways they shouldn't. Mason was supposed to be at his office downtown, not here, holding hands with a stranger, while Hazel was at home with the children. I debated what to do. Should I confront him? Document the scene? My designer's instinct to capture every detail warred with my desire to avoid more family drama. In the end, I quietly packed my documents into my portfolio and left, the image of their clasped hands burned into my memory like an indelible ink stain on pristine paper. The next evening, my phone rang as I was putting final touches on the museum's environmental impact report. Hazel's name on the screen made me hesitate, but something, perhaps architect's intuition about structural weaknesses, made me answer. "Can I come over?" Her voice cracked with emotion. "Please, Evelyn. I really need to talk." 20 minutes later, Hazel stood in my entryway, looking nothing like the polished woman who usually appeared at my door. Her eyes were red and swollen, her designer clothes replaced by worn yoga pants and a sweater. For a moment, I saw past the perfect facade she usually maintained to something more real and fragile. "The kids aren't with me," she said quickly, noticing me glance behind her. "They're with Victoria." Evening confession. I led Hazel to my living room, where the setting sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She sank into my modernist sofa, looking small against the clean lines and neutral tones of my carefully designed space. "I haven't been honest with you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those times I left the kids with you. I wasn't running errands or meeting clients." I sat in my designer armchair across from her, my professional mask firmly in place. "Where were you going, Hazel?" "Therapy." The words seemed to deflate her completely. "I've been seeing a therapist for postpartum depression and anxiety. I didn't want anyone to know." I was afraid of being judged, of being seen as a failure. The confession hung in the air between us like suspended dust in sunlight. I thought about all the times she dropped off the children, her hurried exits, her evasive explanations. I should have told you the truth, she continued, wiping at her eyes. Should have asked properly. But admitting I needed help felt like admitting I wasn't the perfect mother everyone expected me to be. The perfect wife. The perfect daughter. Hazel, I started, my voice softer than I intended. Why didn't you just tell me? Look at you, she gestured around my immaculate home, at the award-winning designs framed on the walls. You're so accomplished. Put together. I'm barely holding it together most days. The kids, the move, leaving my teaching career. It's all been too much. I thought about the woman I'd seen with Mason at the cafe, the additional weight Hazel was unknowingly carrying. The irony of her discussing perfection while her own foundation was cracking wasn't lost on me. I understand the need to maintain appearances, I said carefully. But taking advantage of me, disrupting my work, that wasn't the right way to handle it. I know. She nodded, tears falling freely now. I told myself it was okay because we're family. Because Oliver loves your architectural models, and Ruby feels safe here. But I was wrong. I'm sorry, Evelyn. Truly sorry. A difficult truth. As I watched Hazel break down on my sofa, the weight of what I'd witnessed at the cafe pressed against my conscience. Like a structural flaw in a building's foundation. I knew this secret could cause everything to collapse. Hazel, there's something I need to tell you, I began, my hands gripping the arms of my chair. I saw Mason yesterday. She looked up, confusion crossing her tear-stained face. At his office? No, at the Architects Cafe near the museum site. He was with a woman. The color drained from Hazel's face. A woman? They seemed intimate. He was holding her hand. I kept my voice steady, professional, as if delivering a difficult project assessment to a client. But Hazel's reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of shock or anger, she grew very still, her expression shifting to something like resignation. I know about her, she said quietly. She's his half-sister. Now it was my turn to be surprised. His half-sister? Mason was adopted as a baby, Hazel explained, her voice steadying. He recently found his biological family. He's been meeting his half-sister in secret because he's worried about how it might affect his relationship with his adoptive parents. He hasn't even told them he's found his birth family. The revelation settled over my minimalist living room like a new layer of design, transforming everything I thought I knew. All of us, Hazel, Mason, myself, were keeping secrets, building walls between ourselves and those we called family. More secrets, I murmured, standing to pace across my polished concrete floors. Why are we all so afraid of the truth? I don't know, Hazel admitted. Maybe because the truth makes us vulnerable. It's easier to maintain the perfect image everyone expects. Moving forward. We need to stop this, I said, my architect's mind already sketching out a new blueprint for our relationship. All these secrets, all these perfect facades we're trying to maintain, they're not sustainable structures. Hazel managed a weak smile at my architectural metaphor. What do you suggest? First, you need to hire a proper babysitter for your therapy appointments. I can help you find someone reliable. I sat back down, leaning forward. Second, while I can't be your regular childcare solution, I'm willing to have Oliver and Ruby visit occasionally, with advance notice. They're good kids, and I admit I enjoy showing Oliver my designs. He talks about your models constantly, Hazel said, a genuine warmth creeping into her voice. He told his preschool teacher he wants to be an architect like Aunt Evelyn. The comment touched something in me I hadn't expected. Third, I continued, keeping my professional composure. You need to talk to Mason about being more open with his family. Secrets have a way of causing structural damage to relationships. You sound like my therapist, Hazel said, attempting a weak laugh. But you're right. We all need to be more honest. Next day, I called my father the following morning, catching him before his first meeting. Dad, we need to talk about boundaries and expectations, I began, standing at my drafting table. I've spoken with Hazel, and we've come to an understanding. There was a pause on the line. Go on. I'll maintain a relationship with her and the children, but on clear, mutually agreed terms. Like any good design, it needs a proper foundation and clear structural lines. To my surprise, my father's voice softened. You're right. I apologize for threatening your professional connections. That was out of line. 3 months later, life has found a new equilibrium, like a building settling onto its foundation. Hazel and the children moved into their own apartment across town after she filed for divorce from Mason. The truth about his biological family eventually came out, causing ripples through both families that we're still dealing with. I've maintained my boundaries while finding ways to be present for my family. Oliver visits my office every other Saturday, where I've set up a small drafting table next to mine. He's surprisingly talented at spatial design for a 5-year-old. Ruby prefers to color in my meeting room, turning my professional space into an impromptu art gallery. Working with my therapist, yes, I started seeing one too. I've begun to understand that family relationships, like architecture, require both solid foundations and flexible spaces. Some days I help Hazel with the kids. Other days I focus entirely on my museum project, which is finally nearing completion. My father and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. He attended the museum project's preliminary review last week, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine pride in his eyes, not for my compliance with family expectations, but for my professional achievements. Present day. I'm writing this from a small cafe in Barcelona, where I'm studying Gaudi's architecture during a much-needed break. Hazel sends me daily updates about the children, respecting my boundaries while maintaining our connection. We're not the perfect family I used to draw in my childhood sketches, but we're building something real, a structure that can withstand both storms and sunshine. The museum project opens next month. Oliver has already asked if he can attend the opening ceremony. He wants to see how the models he's watched me work on have transformed into reality. I'm learning that sometimes the most beautiful designs aren't the ones we initially planned, but the ones that emerge when we allow for both structure and flexibility. As an architect, I understand that every building needs both solid foundations and room to settle. The same, I'm discovering, is true of families. We're all works in progress, constantly being redesigned and renovated, but that's what makes us strong.